When Daniel and Rachel Whitmore purchased the sprawling Napa Valley estate in 2024, they believed they had found their dream home. Nestled among rolling hills and acres of vineyards, the property was breathtaking olive groves, a stone-clad main house, and a guest cottage that overlooked a tranquil pond. The previous owner? Robin Williams. They knew that, of course. Everyone in the area did. The house had been part of his retreat from the world, a sanctuary away from the pressures of Hollywood. After his passing, the estate sat vacant for years before it was finally sold. For Daniel, a retired venture capitalist, and Rachel, a former chef looking to start her own winery, the house was a perfect fit. It had charm, history, and enough space for their future plans. The real estate agent assured them the home had been fully renovated, new plumbing, updated electrical, fresh paint to cover years of neglect. And yet, the house still felt lived in. Rachel noticed it first. Presence. Not overt, not threatening, but something lingering. The way the air seemed heavier in certain rooms. The faint scent of cigar smoke in the study, though no one had smoked there in years. The way the doors never quite stayed closed, no matter how often they latched them. She chalked it up to her imagination until the piano played by itself. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, a single note rang out from the grand piano in the sitting room. A low, solemn key. Then another. She turned, expecting to see Daniel, but he was outside, walking the vineyard. The room was empty. Rachel stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, as the piano played 3 more notes, slow, deliberate, not random, intentional, and then silence. That night, she didn't say anything. She didn't want to sound ridiculous. But in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, as she lay awake listening to the house settle, she swore she heard it again. Not the piano, not footsteps, laughter, soft at first, then fuller, rich, unmistakably familiar. Rachel turned to Daniel, shaking him awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. He listened. The room was silent. "Hear what?" he murmured. Rachel opened her mouth to explain, but she couldn't. Because how do you tell someone that in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, in a house that once belonged to Robin Williams? You just heard him laugh? The next morning, Rachel moved through the house as if nothing had happened, but the air felt different. The laughter from the night before still lingered in her mind, light, playful, yet distant, like an echo from another time. Maybe it had been the wind, she told herself. Sound carried strangely out here in the valley, bouncing between the hills, twisting through the olive trees. Still, she found herself pausing at the piano before making her morning coffee. The sleek black lid was closed, its polished surface reflecting the soft golden light pouring in through the kitchen windows. She hesitated, then lifted the lid, revealing the ivory keys beneath. They were smooth and unmarked, as pristine as the day they had moved in. She pressed a key. A soft note rang out, warm and full. Nothing unusual. No eerie presence. Just an instrument sitting in an empty house. And yet, as she turned away, she swore she felt something. A shift in the air. Like someone was standing just behind her, watching. Daniel was already outside, walking the vineyard. He had taken quickly to the land, throwing himself into the rhythms of tending the vines, learning about soil acidity, irrigation, the delicate balance of sunlight and shade. Rachel could see him from the kitchen window, his broad frame moving slowly down the rows of grapevines, pausing now and then to touch the leaves, testing their strength between his fingers. The land was old, the vines twisted and gnarled, planted decades ago, long before the house had been built. They stretched in neat, endless rows down the sloping hillside, disappearing into the mist that hung over the valley each morning. Rachel stepped onto the back patio, breathing in the crisp air. The scent of earth and grape skins filled her nose, mixing with the faint bitterness of olive trees. The house had been quiet all morning, no footsteps, no laughter, nothing out of place. Maybe it had all been in her head. She told herself that again as she walked down the stone path toward the vineyard. Daniel turned when he saw her, his face lighting up. "You should see this," he said, gesturing toward the vines. "The soil here is incredible. perfect for the first batch. Rachel smiled, grateful for the normalcy of his excitement. She leaned in as he pulled a cluster of deep purple grapes from the vine, rolling them between his fingers. "They need another week," he said. "Maybe 2. But the yield is looking good." She nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She could still hear it, in the back of her thoughts, that laughter. Not just laughter, but the way it had carried, the warmth of it, the sadness underneath. She had heard it 1,000 times before, in interviews, in movies, in old clips playing on late-night TV. She swallowed. "Do you ever feel, I don't know, like we're not alone here?" Daniel chuckled, taking a bite of one of the grapes, testing its sweetness. "Well, technically, we're not. You've got about 1,000 vines watching you right now." Rachel didn't laugh. She let the moment settle between them, waiting for him to catch the weight of her words. After a pause, he sighed and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Look," he said, "I know this place has history, and I know what you're thinking. But ghosts? Come on, Rach. It's just an old house." She wanted to believe him. She really did. But that evening, as the sun bled into the hills and the sky darkened to a rich, velvety blue, something happened that she couldn't ignore. She was alone in the study, flipping through an old recipe book she had found in one of the kitchen cabinets, something left behind by the previous owner, full of handwritten notes and wine pairings. A piece of paper slipped from the pages, fluttering to the floor. Rachel bent to pick it up, expecting a grocery list or a forgotten recipe. Instead, she found a torn scrap of stationery, yellowed at the edges. A single sentence was scrawled across it in faded ink, the handwriting loose and hurried, as if written in a moment of distraction. "I don't belong here." Rachel stared at the words, her pulse quickening. The ink had bled slightly into the paper, as if it had been left in a damp place for too long. She turned it over, half expecting more writing, a signature, something. But the back was blank. A sudden chill prickled her skin. She glanced toward the open doorway leading into the hall, half expecting to see someone standing there. No one. The house was silent. Rachel swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. It was nothing, she told herself. Just an old note. Someone's passing thought, scribbled down and forgotten. But why did it feel so personal? She didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. Because deep down, she already knew this house wasn't empty. And whoever was here, they wanted her to know it. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The wind rolled through the valley that night, thick with the scent of ripening grapes and dry earth. The house, nestled deep in the vineyard, stood like a lone sentinel against the hills, its stone walls absorbing the last warmth of the day. Inside, Rachel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her fingers curled into the linen sheets. The note still sat on her nightstand, its presence pressing against her like an unspoken thought. "I don't belong here." She had tried to dismiss it, had tried to tell herself it was nothing, but the words refused to leave her mind. The ink had looked too fresh. The way the paper had fallen, landing so precisely at her feet, as if placed there rather than forgotten between the pages of an old book. Beside her, Daniel's breathing was slow and steady, lost in sleep. She envied his ease, the way he had shrugged off the strange occurrences in the house as quirks of an old property. A draft, shifting wood, the natural creaks and groans of a structure settling in the night. But it was more than that. Rachel turned onto her side, staring at the soft glow of the hallway light filtering under the door. The house was quiet now, but it never felt still. There was always something, a presence, subtle yet constant, like the faintest hum beneath the surface of a song. Then, just as she began to drift into the edges of sleep, she heard it. A whisper, faint at first, like a breeze slipping through the walls, then clearer. A voice. She stiffened, her heart hammering, every nerve in her body snapping to attention. It wasn't coming from the hallway or from the vineyard beyond the open window. It was coming from inside the house. Rachel held her breath, straining to hear. It was low, indistinct, threading through the stillness like a distant conversation just beyond reach. A murmur, familiar yet foreign, rising and falling as if someone were speaking just out of sight. Then, a chuckle. A soft, rich sound, light-hearted, unmistakable. Rachel's blood ran cold. She sat up too quickly, the sheets tangling around her legs. The whispering stopped. The air went thick, heavy with silence. She turned toward Daniel, shaking his shoulder. "Daniel, wake up," he grumbled, shifting onto his side. "What?" His voice was thick with sleep. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Rach, it's late. Just listen." Daniel exhaled sharply, propping himself up on one elbow. The bedroom was still, nothing but the distant rustling of the vineyard beyond the open window. No voices, no laughter, nothing. Rachel swallowed, her pulse pounding against her ribs. "I heard someone talking," she said quietly, and then she hesitated. The words felt absurd on her tongue. Daniel sat up fully, running a hand through his hair. "It's an old house," he muttered. "Sound carries. Maybe it was an animal outside." She shook her head. "It wasn't outside. It was here. Inside." He sighed again, rubbing his eyes. "Rach, we've been over this. There's no one here but us." But she wasn't so sure. She lay back down, her body tense beneath the sheets, her ears straining against the silence. Daniel settled beside her, his breathing slow, and even once more. Rachel closed her eyes, trying to will herself to sleep. Then, just as she felt herself slipping under, she heard it again, a whisper, just behind her ear. "Oh, come on now, don't be afraid." A voice full of warmth, mischief, laughter underneath. She felt the breath against her skin. Rachel gasped, lurching upright. The room was empty, the air still. She pressed a hand against her chest, her heart racing, her skin cold despite the warm summer night. Daniel stirred. "What now?" Rachel didn't answer, because this time she wasn't imagining it. And whoever was here, they weren't just passing through. Morning light crept into the bedroom in thin, pale streaks, filtering through the heavy curtains. The vineyard outside shimmered under a fine mist, the grapes glistening like tiny, dark jewels. The house should have felt warm, safe, alive, bathed in golden sunlight. But it didn't. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, still gripping the sheets, her body tense as if it hadn't relaxed all night. She had barely slept, not really. Each time she drifted off, a sound pulled her back. A whisper, a chuckle, the faintest creak of floorboards shifting under an unseen weight. Daniel had already gone. She could hear him outside, his voice distant, calling to someone, probably the contractor coming to look at the irrigation system. Normal things, tangible things, not ghosts. She wanted to tell herself it had been a dream, that voice was just a trick of exhaustion. But she knew better. Her gaze drifted toward the doorway. The house stretched beyond it, a series of hallways and rooms steeped in history, filled with air that never quite felt empty. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to stand. The floor was cold beneath her feet. In the bathroom, she splashed water onto her face, watching droplets slide down her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired, rimmed with faint shadows. She ran a towel over her face, inhaling the scent of lavender soap. A simple, grounding thing. Real. Then something moved in the mirror. Rachel froze. At first, she thought it was just a shadow, something shifting as the morning light changed. But then she saw it, a figure, just behind her shoulder. Not clear, not solid. A presence more than a person, the faintest suggestion of a shape. And then laughter. Rachel spun around. The bathroom was empty. The mirror reflected only her, standing there, breath shallow, skin prickling with cold. She pressed a hand to her chest, forcing herself to stay calm. It was real. It was real. It was real. She swallowed hard, gripping the sink. "Who are you?" she whispered. No answer. But deep inside, she already knew. Later, she found herself in the study again, running her fingers along the edge of the grand piano. She wasn't sure why she had come here. Maybe because it felt like his space. A place where he had once sat, played, thought. Daniel's voice drifted through the open patio doors, distant and unconcerned. The vineyard was alive with movement, workers tending the vines, the soft hum of an engine as someone drove an ATV between the rows. But inside, the house was silent. Rachel pulled out the piano bench and sat. The keys were cool under her fingertips. She hesitated, then pressed a single note. The sound rang out, full and rich, vibrating through the still air. A pause. Then, without her touching them, another key pressed down. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The note held for a moment, then faded. A quiet stillness followed, thick with something unseen. She lifted her hands from the keys. "Is it you?" she whispered. Silence. And then a whisper, close to her ear. Soft, almost playful. "Miss me?" The air went cold. Rachel bolted upright, the bench scraping against the floor as she stumbled backward. She turned, expecting to see someone standing there. But the room was empty. Only the faint scent of cigar smoke remained, curling in the air. And somewhere, just out of reach, a whisper of laughter. The house was waking up. Rachel didn't tell Daniel. Not at first. Not after the piano, not after the mirror, not even after the whisper. She told herself it wasn't real, that it was just exhaustion, stress, an overactive mind. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something was in this house. And it wasn't malevolent. It wasn't a faceless presence lurking in the dark corners, or a shadow creeping in the night. It was him, or at least what remained of him. That evening, the sky burned orange and pink over the vineyard, casting long liquid shadows across the land. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch after a long day outside, his breathing slow and even. The house had settled into quiet, the kind that only came just before something happened. Rachel moved through the dimly lit halls, her bare feet pressing against cool wooden floors. The house felt alive around her, not in the way a haunted house does, with ominous creaks and slamming doors, but in a gentler, sadder way, as if it remembered. She stopped outside the study, her fingers grazing the doorframe. The air was warm, thick with a scent that didn't belong: leather, old books, the faintest trace of cigar smoke. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she stepped inside. The piano sat in its usual place, its black lacquered surface gleaming under the low light. A faint draft stirred the curtains near the open window. And then the bench creaked. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Creaked again, slow, deliberate, as if someone were shifting their weight. She took a single step forward, her heart hammering in her chest. "Robin?" she whispered. Silence. Then a sigh. Not human, not wind, something in between. A breath not quite from this world. The air shifted. A shape flickered in the dim light, just out of focus. A presence not fully formed, not quite here, but real enough. She could feel it. Then, softly, so softly she almost didn't hear it, a voice. Warm. Familiar. His, "You don't have to be afraid." Tears pricked at Rachel's eyes. She swallowed hard, stepping closer. "Why are you still here?" she whispered. The silence stretched, heavy with something unspoken. And then, just for a moment, she felt him. Not as a ghost. Not as a cold breath on her neck or a flicker of shadow in the corner of her eye. As a presence. A lingering warmth in the air. A quiet energy filling the space between the living and the dead. A final performance, playing for an audience that no longer existed. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settle around her. And then laughter. Soft, distant, fading. The air lightened. The presence shifted, unraveled, drifted. The house exhaled. Rachel opened her eyes. The room was empty. The piano was silent. The air smelled of nothing but old wood and summer air. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Somewhere in the vineyard, the wind stirred the leaves. And for the first time since moving in, the house felt quiet. Rachel turned, stepping back into the hallway. Behind her, unseen, the piano bench creaked one last time. Curtain call. And then nothing. Rachel didn't tell Daniel. Not at first. Not after the piano, not after the mirror, not even after the whisper. She told herself it wasn't real, that it was just exhaustion, stress, an overactive mind. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something was in this house, and it wasn't malevolent. It wasn't a faceless presence lurking in the dark corners, or a shadow creeping in the night. It was him, or at least what remained of him. That evening, the sky burned orange and pink over the vineyard, casting long liquid shadows across the land. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch after a long day outside, his breathing slow and even. The house had settled into quiet, the kind that only came just before something happened. Rachel moved through the dimly lit halls, her bare feet pressing against cool wooden floors. The house felt alive around her, not in the way a haunted house does, with ominous creaks and slamming doors, but in a gentler, sadder way, as if it remembered. She stopped outside the study, her fingers grazing the doorframe. The air was warm, thick with a scent that didn't belong: leather, old books, the faintest trace of cigar smoke. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she stepped inside. The piano sat in its usual place, its black lacquered surface gleaming under the low light. A faint draft stirred the curtains near the open window, and then the bench creaked. Rachel's breath caught in her throat, creaked again, slow, deliberate, as if someone were shifting their weight. She took a single step forward, her heart hammering in her chest. "Robin?" she whispered. Silence. Then a sigh. Not human, not wind, something in between. A breath not quite from this world. The air shifted. A shape flickered in the dim light, just out of focus. A presence not fully formed, not quite here, but real enough. She could feel it. Then, softly, so softly she almost didn't hear it, a voice. Warm. Familiar. His, "You don't have to be afraid." Tears pricked at Rachel's eyes. She swallowed hard, stepping closer. "Why are you still here?" she whispered. The silence stretched, heavy with something unspoken. And then, just for a moment, she felt him. Not as a ghost. Not as a cold breath on her neck or a flicker of shadow in the corner of her eye. As a presence. A lingering warmth in the air. A quiet energy filling the space between the living and the dead. A final performance, playing for an audience that no longer existed. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settle around her. And then laughter. Soft, distant, fading. The air lightened. The presence shifted, unraveled, drifted. The house exhaled. Rachel opened her eyes. The room was empty. The piano was silent. The air smelled of nothing but old wood and summer air. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Somewhere in the vineyard, the wind stirred the leaves. And for the first time since moving in, the house felt quiet. Rachel turned, stepping back into the hallway. Behind her, unseen, the piano bench creaked one last time. Curtain call. And then nothing. Months passed. Life settled. The whispers, the laughter, the fleeting moments of something just beyond reach, they faded like echoes, retreating into the corners of memory. Rachel and Daniel lived in the house, filling its walls with their own laughter, their own moments. The vineyard thrived. The house no longer felt haunted, at least, not in the way it once had. One evening, as Rachel tidied up in the study, she found something she hadn't noticed before. Tucked inside the piano bench, wedged between old sheet music, was a small note, yellowed with time. Rachel pulled it free, her fingers trembling. The ink was slightly smudged, but the handwriting was unmistakable, bold, looping, playful. "Smile. The world still needs it." A lump formed in her throat. She traced the words with her fingertip, then folded the note carefully, pressing it to her chest. For the first time since that night, she laughed. A real laugh. And somewhere, maybe in the walls, maybe in the wind, maybe just in the past, a whisper of laughter answered her back. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.